It was a dark and lonely night when James, a young man in his late 20s, found himself driving down an old, desolate highway that cut through the dense jungle. The only sound was the hum of his car's engine and the occasional rustle of the trees. He had been on the road for hours, and exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. The clock on his dashboard blinked 2:17 a.m., but he wasn't far from his destination, just a few more miles. He shook his head, trying to stay awake. It had been a long day, and the isolation of the road was starting to get to him. He glanced at his rearview mirror, but saw nothing but the empty stretch of road behind him. The thick trees on both sides seemed to press in, dark and unmoving. The headlights flickered for a second. James jolted in his seat, his heart skipping a beat. He rubbed his eyes and muttered to himself, "Just tired. It's nothing." But then, something caught his eye. Up ahead, at the edge of the highway, a woman, dressed in white, staring into the darkness. James's pulse quickened. What was she doing out here at this hour? He slowed the car as he approached her. The woman didn't move. She stood still with her back to him as though she hadn't noticed his approach. Her long, flowing white dress shimmered faintly in the dim light. Her hair, is hidden by the night, fell around her like a curtain. "Are you all right?" James called out, his voice trembling slightly as he rolled down the window, but no response from her. He reached for the horn, ready to honk it if she didn't move, but then she turned around slowly. Her face is pale and emotionless. Her eyes were pitch black, and her lips are opened, with revealing a slow and scary smile.
"Keep driving if you valued life,"
she whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the engine. A chill ran down James's spine. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he pressed the accelerator, unwilling to look back. But the image of her hollow eyes and scary smile lingered in his mind. He didn't dare glance in his rearview mirror, but something urged him to look, so he stole a quick look, and she was gone. James tried to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up his neck. It was just a trick of the mind, he told himself. He needed to focus on the road ahead. The headlights flickered again. James cursed under his breath and hit the dashboard. But before he could do anything, the car began to sputter, its engine coughing and stuttering. He pulled over to the side of the road and wondering what could be wrong. The jungle around him was unnervingly silent. There were no animals, no rustling of leaves, just the stillness of the night. James tried restarting the car, but it wouldn't turn over.
"Come on! Come on!"
he muttered. Panic is rising in his chest. He looked around, half expecting to see the woman again, but there was nothing. Just the suffocating darkness of the jungle and the sound of his own breath. Then he heard something, a faint sound, barely noticeable at first. It was a soft tapping, like someone knocking on the window. James' body got froze and his blood turning cold, but somehow he turned slowly, his eyes locking onto the rearview mirror, and then his breath caught in his throat. There she was, standing directly behind him in the back seat. Her face twisted into an abnormal smile, and her eyes are wide and black as night. James screamed and turned around to face her, but the seat was empty. Panicked, he slammed his foot on the gas, and the car jerked forward, lurching down the highway as the engine roared to life once more. The headlights illuminated the road ahead, but now the trees seemed to blur, stretching endlessly, like the road was never ending. He glanced in the rearview mirror again. The woman wasn't there, but something felt horribly wrong. The jungle was closing in around him, the path narrowing as if the road itself was twisting and changing. The air grew colder and the night seemed to grow darker. He could hear the faint sound of whispering in the wind, a soft voice calling his name over and over. James gripped the steering wheel tightly, his hands slick with sweat. He sped down the highway. His mind is racing and his heart pounding in his chest. The road stretched on, twisting and turning, but no matter how fast he drove, it felt as though he was going nowhere. And then just as suddenly as it had started, the car stopped. The engine died, and the headlights flickered and went out, and James was plunged into complete darkness. A cold and bone-chilling silence filled the air. The only sound was his own breath. He tried the ignition again, but it was no use. The car was dead. Outside the car, the jungle seemed to grow silent. The trees stood still, and their branches reaching toward him like ghostly fingers. In the distance, he heard something, a soft and low laugh that made a chill run down his spine. Her once again, in white, stood motionless, her black eyes locking onto his, and she whispered, "You will never leave." The last thing James remembered was her scary face before his vision blurred and everything went black. James woke up with a start. His eyes fluttered open to the bright sunlight streaming through the windshield. He looked around in confusion. He was still on the highway, but everything seemed normal. The car was running and the engine humming steadily. The jungle was quiet, and the road was as empty as it had been when he first began his journey. His heart pounded as he looked at the dashboard. The clock read 8:23 a.m. He slowly stepped out of the car. There was no sign of the woman, no trace of that scary events that had just happened. It was as if it had all been a dream, but he knew it hadn't been. The terror was still fresh in his mind. James glanced back toward the stretch of road he had just driven. There was no sign of the strange mist, no scary whispering. Everything seemed too peaceful. His hands shaking as he started the car and drove off, not daring to look back. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd never really left that road, that something was still waiting for him in the shadows. It was past midnight when Rohan finally left his friend's wedding in Ratnagiri, deciding to drive back to Mumbai alone. The coastal highway NH66, known for its sharp turns and dense forests, stretched ahead in eerie silence. The monsoon had just passed, leaving the air thick with mist. His car's headlights barely cut through the fog as he turned up the music to keep himself awake. After an hour on the deserted road, his phone lost signal. He wasn't worried. It was a common issue on this highway. But then, he saw someone. A beautiful woman in a red sari stood by the roadside, her long hair disheveled, her face hidden. She lifted a hand, asking for a lift. Rohan hesitated. He had heard countless stories about hitchhikers on NH66, but she looked like she needed help. Against his better judgment, he slowed down and rolled down the window slightly. "Are you okay? Do you need a ride?" he asked. She nodded without speaking. Something about her silence unsettled him, but he unlocked the door anyway. She slid into the back seat, the scent of damp earth and jasmine filling the car. Rohan adjusted the rearview mirror to get a better look at her, but the fog inside made it difficult. Trying to ease the tension, he asked, "Where are you headed?" She replied in low voice, "Ahead." Her voice was barely audible, yet it sent chills down his spine. He focused on the road, resisting the urge to keep checking the mirror. The silence between them grew heavier with each passing kilometer. Then something shifted. The air inside turned colder. Rohan could see his own breath fogging up the windshield. A low, haunting hum came from the back seat. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, and when he looked at the rearview mirror, his body freezed. The woman was not sitting anymore. She was floating. Her face was looking pale, and her hollow eyes staring directly at him. A twisted smile stretched across her face. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Instead, the humming grew louder, pressing into his skull like nails. Panic surged through Rohan as he slammed the brakes. The car skidded to a halt, tires screeching on the wet road. He turned back and saw that she was gone. His heartbeat running like a horse, and in panic, he opened the door and ran into the darkness. The jungle on either side of the road loomed over him. He pulled out his phone, but the screen was dead. A cold whisper brushed against his ear.
Why did you stop? We weren't there yet.
His blood ran cold. He turned, expecting to see her behind him, but there was nothing, just the rustling trees and the distant cry of a night bird. A sudden movement near his car caught his eye. In the rear windshield, he could see her face, inside his car, smiling at him from the driver's seat. The engine roared to life. The car sped off without him, its taillights vanishing into the night, leaving Rohan standing in the middle of NH66. As he stood there, trembling, the realization hit him. She never needed a ride. She was waiting for someone to take theirs. Rohan stumbled backward, his breathing ragged. Then a soft chime rang from his pocket. His phone was back on. The screen showed a notification, a message from an unknown number. Turn around. Every nerve in his body screamed against it, but something compelled him. Slowly, he turned. The woman in red was standing right behind him, her hollow eyes now inches from his own. Her lips curled into a whisper he could finally hear.
Now it's your turn to drive.
And then everything went black, and the road remained silent once more.